Today we're starting on the next makeover in my home, the fireplace. While I love having a fireplace in our new home, my biggest problem with it is that it's in the corner and it doesn't go all the way up to the ceiling. So in my opinion, it kind of just sticks out and doesn't feel complete in this room. We're gonna be taking the fireplace all the way up to the ceiling, as well as building out a hearth along the ground to make it feel like it was always meant to be in this space. First, I had to clear out the space and remove all of the Christmas decor from the top of the fireplace. I'm gonna use some painter's tape to outline where I want the hearth to go, and then we kind of use this as a guide to measure our wood so we know how long it needs to be. As I was laying the tape, I noticed that the whole mantle looked like it was pulling away from the wall. Well, this completely threw a wrench in my plans. I was not anticipating removing the entire existing mantle. But due to how poorly it was held in place with only a few screws and brad nails, I'm glad that I took it off. This gave me the opportunity to rethink the design and really make it how I had envisioned, rather than trying to build off of what was already in place. With the mantle removed, we headed to Home Depot to get some 2x4s for framing out the top wall, hearth, and mantle. We went with the premium burl first studs over your basic 2x4s as they tend to be straighter, and I'm building out a wall here, but you still want to check each piece for any bowing. Next, we're going to cut down all of the 2x4s to build out the frame and be able to take this fireplace all the way up to the ceiling. So we're going to cut one piece that's going to go along the bottom, right on top of where the current fireplace ends. And then we're going to cut down a couple of vertical pieces that will hold our drywall. And then at the top, we're going to cut down two more 2x4s to go right across the ceiling. That's going to be our anchor piece. Mason helped me get all the wood cut down, and we made sure that the top plate fit before cutting down those vertical studs and building out the wall section. I marked where all the studs needed to go so that they are 16 inches on center. I got all of my wood pieces cut, so now we can build out the frame and then get it up on the wall. I'm gonna build out the framing for everything first. So next I'm gonna be using some more 2x4s to build out that hearth. And since we took that original mantle off, now I can kind of changed the way that I was going to do the hearth in the first place. So we can kind of ignore that tape that we had added at the very beginning. And now I'm gonna take the hearth all the way over to the wall on either side. And to do that, like I said, I cut down some 2x4s, and in between all of my 2x4s, I cut down these little spacers. These are about 3 inches each. They're gonna go in between my two 2x4s, and that's gonna create the frame for the hearth. In order for the hearth to fit properly, I have to remove part of the baseboard where it's gonna sit. I ended up building a second frame piece for the back right up against the wall, and then to cover the framing, I'm cutting down a 1/4 inch plywood. Somehow the two frame sections were not level with each other, and I could not figure out why with them sitting on the same flooring. But Josh had the brilliant idea to cut down some of the scrap MDF that I had from the Whiskey Lounge makeover, and that was perfect. Problem solved. So underneath of the fireplace right here, we do have the access panel, which the hearth is going to be blocking. I didn't want to have to recut out all of this drywall and lift the entire fireplace insert up. So instead I built a removable hearth. So we are going to be covering this up, but there's no heat that comes out of this section at all. I did test it, and I did test it with the hearth in front of it just to make sure that it's not a fire hazard. So there is going to be kind of a gap right here that's going to look a little bit unfinished, but it's going to be worth it so that we can easily lift this part out if we ever need to access those wires. For the back, for the surround part of the fireplace, I found these plastic but 3-dimensional tiles from Amazon that looks like brick, and it actually fits perfectly right above here. But I'm gonna place this all the way around this lower section of the fireplace and then also along our hearth. Now, the reviews of this product were actually really terrible on Amazon. It only has a 2-star review. I think it might be 2.5 stars, but either way, it's pretty bad. But I knew this was exactly what I was looking for, with it having that 3-dimensional element to it and actually looking like stone or brick. And what I want to do to it, I think if I were to just throw this up on the wall, call it a day, yes, it would look cheap and it would look like plastic. But what I'm going to do is take joint compound and kind of do a German schmear technique, similar to what I did in my kitchen at our old house for our backsplash. And I really love that look and how that turned out. So I think adding that joint compound over top of this is going to dull down some of that shine, but also give us a more realistic look without adding all of that weight of real brick or real stone. The first panel I cut down, I used an X-Acto knife, but then I realized that scissors work too, and that was much easier. Now that we have all of the faux stone added around the surround of the fireplace, and we have our hearth built and have this in place, next I'm gonna be adding in the grout. And this is what's gonna give it that German schmear look like I did in the kitchen of my last house. And I know I kept calling it joint compound earlier, but joint compound will be for the top of the fireplace after we add that drywall on the top section, and then we'll have to add some joint compound there. You have to let the grout set up and absorb that water for about 5 minutes, so I taped off the walls while I waited. Now, it's been about a week since I've added that grout in the German schmear technique around the fireplace, and it does seem to be holding up pretty well. I will show you a spot on the hearth part where my dogs have kind of bumped into it or their toys have hit off of it and it has crumbled a little bit, and I was afraid that that might happen. So what I would actually suggest if anyone is trying to recreate something like this with the faux stone, I would suggest putting thin set or putting mortar behind on the entire surround before you even place those panels down. I think that would help fill in the spaces behind where it was just hollow and empty. And you can see I can just push on these and it indents. So if you added a thin set or something, I think it would help just make it solid behind that, and then you wouldn't have this issue, which is what is causing the grout to crumble. You can see all along here where there is no more grout there because it's been just kind of knocked off, chipped off. You can see it there on the floor. So from here, what I'm gonna do is add this stone coat countertops finish. This is gonna be like a top coat hard coating on top of that grout. I did Google it. It said that you could use this on top of grout and not just on top of resin. So fingers crossed, I hope that this works and gives the whole thing just a hard coat and will help prevent some of that grout from chipping. I used a paintbrush to apply the top coat to make sure that I could get into all the grooves of the grout, even though the directions tell you to use a sponge roller, but this worked out really well. It added that hard coating to the surface and has helped prevent the grout from cracking and chipping off. One thing you want to be cautious of when using this top coat is not to overwork it. Brush it on and then move on, otherwise it will start to build up and ball up on you. So now I need to build the mantle and measured how long I need it to be. I want the mantle to take up the full length of the fireplace. It's going to look like a large beam, but without all of that weight of a real one. So I used 3 1x6s and I glued and browed nailed them together in a U shape. Now I have the box built out for our mantle. So it is hollow on the one side. And then I'm gonna need a support brace across the back of the fireplace for this to sit onto and to be a little bit more sturdy because it is only held together with wood glue and some brad nails. So we wanna make sure that anything we set on top of this, it is going to be supported. So I have another 2x4 here that I cut down that's going to fit inside of here. And then similar to how I built the hearth, I have these little spacer pieces that we will also attach here. And then this is going to fit right inside of our mantle for extra support and stability. And then we thought it would look better aesthetically if we took these outlets and instead of putting them into the wall portion, into the drywall portion of the fireplace, we're actually gonna set them down inside of the mantle. So they're gonna end up sitting like inside of here on the mantle, and then that way you're not gonna see them from the front, but we'll still be able to plug things in and utilize those outlets. I drilled some holes with a spade bit into the 2x4 for the wires to slide through, and then I screwed that brace piece into the fireplace. You can probably tell it's a little bit darker here. I had to turn the power off while working with the electrical, but I actually drilled the holes upside down on the 2x4 at first, and I had to take the whole thing off and re-drill them. I will spare you all of the disastrous details of getting these outlets in and working. I had spent 2 whole days on this myself, and then I eventually called my husband in to help, but essentially the outlet was sticking out above the mantle and I'd wanted it to be flush. So to fix this, I took my Dremel with a carving bit and countersunk the hole so that the outlet and the cover would then end up sitting flush on top of the mantle. And in hindsight, I wish I had put the outlets on the ends of the mantle rather than on top. The countersunk holes are not perfect. If I had had a router, this would look a lot cleaner and smoother, but I'm working with the tools that I have here and it turned out pretty good. We tested to make sure that everything was going to fit, but didn't want to secure the mantle in place until after getting the drywall up, so that's what I did next. I cut a small hole that would go around the wires that are sticking out from inside the corner. I mentioned that I had a surprise planned for this video, and what we're gonna be doing is actually creating a hidden door. I have this mirror that we brought from our old house, and we're actually gonna be using this as the doorway. So I'm gonna be cutting a hole out of the drywall. We'll have the mirror here and then put hidden hinges on it that will then be able to open up, and we can access behind the drywall for some storage. I marked where the top and the bottom of my mirror were going to sit, and then I gave myself a 1-inch allowance all the way around the mirror to fully cover this hole. But unfortunately, I ended up making the hole slightly too long, which you will see here in a little bit. So now I need to frame in the drywall where we cut that big hole out of. So I have this corner molding here. I'm gonna miter the corners so that it has a nice seamless finish to it. This stuff is proving to be a little bit difficult to cut and to miter because once I cut it, you can see like this side looks right. It has that miter, and then this side is kind of just like straight across, but it still has a slight miter here. So it's proving to be a little bit difficult as I'm trying to line them up, but struggling to figure it out, and we'll get it done as always. Now it's time for the most boring part, mudding in the drywall. This was my first time adding in the corner tape and getting the edges to look seamless, and I did 2 layers of the mud. I know you're going to be hearing my dogs in the background throughout this entire video. I'm so sorry. There is nothing I can do about that. They are going to be running around my house and playing with each other. But anyways, I got the drywall taped and mudded, and it actually looks pretty good. I am proud of myself. This is the first time I've done something like that, and I think it looks pretty smooth. It's not perfect, but it looks good. So now we need to get the paint up on the walls. I did a coat of primer and then 2 coats of the color Creamy by Sherwin-Williams, which I had already had on hand, and it's a warm toned white, but the underlayer color doesn't really matter here. I'm going to add a DIY lime wash over top. Well, I have finally finished the electrical inside of the mantle. It only took me about 2 days to try and figure it out by myself before I called in reinforcements, and my husband was able to figure it out in about 10 minutes. And there were some things that I would do differently the next time, but for my first time doing something like this, it looks pretty good, which is kind of the moral of the story with this project. A lot of firsts for me here. But anyways, that's how I like to learn, trial and error, just doing things, figuring it out as I go, and I want to encourage you guys to do the same. So next I need to fill in all of my holes and my joints here with some wood filler, and I'm going to use this Durham's water putty. Now I've used this a couple of times in the past. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with it. It has worked for me. It has been awful for me, so I am going to give it another shot because I do think that this is going to stain the best whenever we go to cover the stain, because as we all know, wood filler is pretty hard to get to stain and to match that true color. So we'll see how this one does. All you do here is add water to the powder until you have the consistency that you want. I've used it thicker and thinner, and I tend to like it on the thicker side, more like peanut butter. And these silicone cups and stir sticks are a game changer when using products like this. They come clean super easy, and you can use them over and over again. Like I mentioned earlier, I want the mantle to look like a solid beam. So I'm filling in all of the cracks where the wood meets on the sides as well to make it look as much like one piece of wood as I could get it to look. Typically when I use this water putty, I sand the excess off with sandpaper once it's dried, but since it's water soluble, this time I decided to use water to remove the excess, and I really like this method as you can hardly even tell where I applied wood filler at all. After I cleaned off that excess wood filler, I pre-stained and then stained my mantle in the color Early American. Next, I'm going to add a lime wash to the top section of the fireplace. And I did just get back from my haircut, so same day, same clothes, different hairstyle. I did a lime wash technique in the kitchen of my last house, but I ended up having to redo that multiple times because I just didn't like how it was turning out. I also don't think that I used the right lime. This recipe turned out much better, so let's hope it goes on the walls just as smoothly. Spoiler alert, this time was just as difficult, but here's the materials that I used to make my lime wash. Lime putty, which is in that plastic wrapped container, alum salt, and natural pigments. Making lime putty is super simple. All you have to do is take some garden lime, hydrated lime, and mix it with some water. Now you do want to make sure that it is white. You want to make sure it's a white lime. I made the mistake of getting some off of Amazon that was actually more natural colored, like a tan. And you want to make sure it's white because I'm going to be adding pigments into it to make my own color. And you just mix this up until you get a cream cheese-like consistency for the putty. It should also be smooth, where the one I bought from Amazon ended up having a very gritty texture. That's not what you want. You want your lime to be smooth. This one still has a color to it, but at least it's smooth. So we're gonna go with it. I used a bucket to mix 10 parts of the lime putty with 20 parts of water. Then you add 1 part each of the natural pigment and alum salt. You want the alum salt to be dissolved in water, so I like to take 1 part of the water, add the salt to it, and stick it in the microwave to dissolve for 30 seconds. I'm using this 4-inch block brush to apply the lime wash, and you want to continuously mix that lime wash because the lime particles will immediately start to settle to the bottom. For some reason, this recipe was leaving a strange texture behind. It felt much thinner and more runny than what I had used the last time in my old kitchen. I had to keep going over and over this same section, but then if it had started to dry, the pigment would build up too much in that area. So I added a couple of layers of the lime wash on, and for some reason you could just see all of these brush strokes. I don't know why this time it wasn't going on as smooth. So on the last coat, while it was still semi-wet, I took a dry block brush and then I would blend out and brush the strokes out as best that I could without fully removing the variation in color. This did help smooth out the finish, but you can still see the brush strokes when you look close. Well friends, it has been yet another week that has gone by that I have not been able to work on my fireplace. Unfortunately, my entire family got sick. We just fell like dominoes, one right after the other. Still kind of recovering. I somehow injured my neck, can hardly move it from side to side. It's a little bit painful right now still, but I want to get back to work as it has been over a week since I've done anything. But back to the lime wash wall. So I finished that and I've had a week to sit and stare at it while I've been cooped up sitting on my couch right across from the fireplace, and I don't love it. No surprise. I'm sure that no one is surprised there. There is just too many brush strokes in it. It did not turn out the same way that it did when I did this in my kitchen at my old house, where it looked so soft and seamless and beautiful. You can just see so many brush strokes with this. It's just not what I was intending for, but I'm not going to fix it today. I am going to fix it at a later date. I'm going to try a different type of faux lime wash technique, and for now, we're just going to leave this as is. What I am going to do next is put another coat of stain on the mantle so that we can get this finally secured in place. It is still kind of loose and just floating there, and I want to get that secured for safety purposes. And then one other issue that we've run into, the mirror door that I got to cover up this hole is not quite big enough. And that is entirely my fault. I did not account correctly for this trim molding that was going around the inside to cover up the seams of the drywall. So you can see no matter where I place it, either you see a little bit of the molding at the bottom or you see a little bit of the molding at the top, and I can't quite cover that up. So instead, I am going to work on a custom art piece to cover up this hole. I saw a new technique, maybe not entirely new, but new to me, for staining wood using a magic eraser. And I wish I had thought of that before I did the first coat of stain so we could really see how well it works. But I do have some additional woodworking projects coming up that I am going to test this out on. But for now, I am going to try the magic eraser as an applicator for my second coat of stain. I really like this method for applying stain. It went on so smooth and was able to cover more area than just a rag would. And if you like that more saturated stain look like I do, this worked really well for that. Finally, I can get the mantle secured to the wall. I used a spade bit to countersink my screws, and then I filled in the screw holes with my wood filler water putty and then stained over top of it one more time. There has been one spot of this mantle that has completely frustrated me. I don't know how well you can see it on camera, but there is a gap right here between the drywall and then where the mantle actually starts. So you can see that's where my wires came out so we could get the outlets in. But then there's that, it's like less than a 1-inch gap. And the frustrating part, I was trying to fill it in with like a piece of wood or a piece of trim. Like I have tried several options. This piece of wood fits pretty well until you get down to the end. It will not go all the way through because then the gap starts to narrow. So I thought maybe this wider trim, like we can have it set here and then kind of go up the wall a little bit. Again, then there's like this gap here. I can't seem to figure out why it won't stay. And then I tried some quarter round as well. And again, like there is just this gap that I just cannot seem to fill no matter what I do. So my husband had the idea to use this gap filler, which I've used on projects before. I've never used it for its actual intended purpose of filling a gap, but I felt like that was probably my best bet right now. So I'm going to fill that crack in with the gap filler, cut it down so that it is nice and flush, and then I'm gonna add a piece of edge banding along it so that I can stain it, and hopefully it will be at least somewhat close to the same color and the same tone as what this early American mantle looks like. And then that will be a lot easier to trim that little tiny spot on the ends and make it look a little more seamless rather than trying to like squirrely cut a piece of trim or quarter round or wood to fit into that narrowing angle. I forgot I actually had this reed, which is thicker than edge banding, and I thought that would work better. So I'm soaking it in water for a few minutes to make it more malleable. It's pretty stiff to start out, and it would have snapped if I had tried to force it straight. Then I clamped it down flat to dry. The next day I used liquid nails to glue the reed down and then stained it, and the color match is pretty close. We are so close to wrapping up this project. I wanted to make sure there's light inside the cubby when we open it, and I found these chargeable motion-operated cabinet lights at Lowe's. They come with a charging station and a magnetic command strip for easy installation. You can also change the color tone to what works for you. I tested the lights to make sure the motion sensors worked by placing my mirror over that opening, and I let the lights turn off, and then when I removed the mirror, the lights turned back on as they were supposed to. Well, I didn't get to completely cover this hole in this cubby like I had wanted to, and really making it a secret passageway to be able to open that mirror as a doorway, but I was able to at least hang it up on the wall for now, and for the most part, I was able to cover up those little bits of the molding that were sticking out. Just a few little finishing finishing touches, I added caulk to the edges of the stone and back of the mantel, and then sealed the mantel with a satin poly. I also touched up the paint on the walls. We decided to move the TV from this shorter wall it was on and put it on the longer wall on the opposite side of the fireplace. We love this setup so much better. It feels so cozy with the fireplace, but I did have to patch the holes from where the TV mount was previously. Well, it has taken me over a month to finish the fireplace makeover. I had every intention of finishing it within 2 weeks, but illness and injury unfortunately had prevented me from doing that. And while not everything went according to plan with this build, I do love how it turned out. So without further ado, let's finally take a look at the finished fireplace.